Arthur was very generous with advice. His favorite was, every morning when you wake up, think of something to look forward to that day. This advice came from a man confined to bed with severely crippling rheumatoid arthritis. I can still picture him in his blue-striped broadcloth pajamas hanging very loosely on his skeletal frame, and his translucent skin pulled taut over bone. He was a wise and joyful soul trapped in a barely functioning body. Give me a hug. And I would hug him, but cautiously, because I was afraid if I squeezed too hard, I would break him into a million pieces. I always felt like he was very fragile in body, but never in spirit. Arthur was my grandfather, and I loved him with all of my heart. I once asked Lillian, my grandmother, what had happened to Arthur, and she said, well, when he was working on the D&H Railroad, he got hit in the face with a rail switch, and that caused his rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if that's true. But it didn't really matter, because they were left with the result. A man who was a prisoner in his bed, subjected to the humiliation of bedpans and his loss of independence, and his wife, who took complete responsibility for his care. She was a prisoner of sorts herself. Sometimes she got time off for good behavior. I can still picture her very clearly sitting at the kitchen table, looking out the window, and smoking her Camel cigarettes. She was daydreaming about something. I regret never asking her what that was. Early in their marriage, Lillian and Arthur had a small convenience store in the front room of their home. But when Arthur got sick, they had to close the store, and that room then became their parlor and their bedroom. Arthur's bed was placed next to the large picture window, which used to display all the goods for sale. This gave him some access to the outside world that his disability deprived him of. Lillian's bed was on the opposite side of the room, and over her bed hung a beautiful photograph of their daughter, Babe, who drowned when she was 9 years old. In between the two beds was a wooden glider rocker that Lillian sat in to read or to watch the tiny television perched on the gold medal stand across the room. Visitors could sit on either one of the overstuffed chairs covered with floral slipcovers at the foot of each one of their beds. In the warm weather, the inside front door was left open to invite in visitors to chat with Arthur. He loved conversation, and he loved hearing about all the gossip of the town. But it was things like, well, who's having a baby, or who needs a job. It was never anything hurtful or caustic. He could speak on a variety of topics. Unable to hold up the newspaper, Lillian read it to him. And when I learned how to read, I read it to him too. He remembered everything he heard. Darn, if I wish I didn't inherit that talent. When I was a baby, my parents and I lived with Arthur and Lillian. Now, I don't remember this, but I'm told that my crib was placed next to Arthur's bed, and he would talk to me all day long. And I would sit with my little hands on the bar, swinging my feet, and I would babble back to him. And my grandmother tells me that everyone was shocked when at only 8 months old, I began to speak in complete sentences. I definitely share Arthur's love of conversation. I know then when we're out and about, my children are saying, please don't let her talk to another stranger. Please don't let her talk to another stranger. When I was about 2 years old, my parents bought their first home, and so we moved to another part of town. And when I was old enough to venture off the block, I would walk to my grandparents' home. It took about 20 minutes or so. And when I arrived, I felt so at home. This place was a haven for me. It was a place where I experienced unconditional love. And those feelings sort of set the stage for how I wanted to be when I might be a grandparent someday. On those visits, I often brought my homework with me, and Arthur would help me. On one particular occasion, I was studying for a spelling test. Now, spelling was and still is a challenge for me. I was trying to remember the word chrysanthemum, and Arthur had an idea. He said, break it up into a sentence. Chris and the mum. Then change the I in Chris to Y, drop the D from and, squish it back together, and guess what? I got an A on my spelling test. When I was about 10 years old, it was decided that I was old enough to grandpa sit when my grandmother went to the market. She paid me a quarter to do this, but I would have done it for free. About halfway through the evening, my grandfather would say, it's time, and very excited to participate in our ritual, I would go out into the kitchen and pull down the silver handle on the Frigidaire refrigerator and squeeze my fingers under the white metal vegetable tray, and I would pull out a Sky Bar. My grandparents told me that that treat was reserved only for me. I would bring it back into the living room, and I would set it on the metal TV tray that was trimmed in roses, and I would unwrap each one of those milk chocolate pillows, separate them very carefully, and set them out before me. Sometimes Arthur would say, well, why don't you break up your routine? And I remained steadfast in the order. Vanilla, caramel, peanut, and then the chocolate. Arthur savored with his eyes, and I with my tongue. Arthur would tell me stories about our family, and one of my favorite subjects was Stebbins. Stebbins was his brother-in-law who was married to Lillian's sister. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but Stebbins was an entrepreneur. Arthur said, well, Stebbins lets his toenails grow to such a great length that people actually pay him to watch him cut them. I know that sounds gross, doesn't it? That's what I thought. And then Arthur went on, and well, he saved up all of his toenail cutting money, and he converted it to a $100 bill. And then when he goes into a bar and he orders a drink, well, the bartender can't break the bill, so Stebbins gets his drinks for free, on the promise he'll pay again in the future. We had great laughs together, my grandfather and I. But sadly, he was only in my life for a fraction of time because he died when I was 14. And on the day of his funeral, I was upstairs in my bedroom getting ready to say goodbye to him. But it was inconceivable to me that I would never see this man again. When I went downstairs, I discovered that my parents had left for the funeral without me. The grief just bubbled up. I mean, I sobbed and I sobbed. I was inconsolable. Later, they tried to reassure me that they thought that was for the best interest to leave me home because I was so upset. But I never got to say goodbye to this man that I cherished so much. Thoughts of Arthur bubble up quite often. And what I find most amazing when I think about him is that whenever I was with him, he was always joyful and spirited. I never knew he was in pain. I had no idea until I started to suffer from arthritis what he must have been experiencing. Yet, we never saw it. I try very hard to remember his advice. And this morning, When I woke up, I thought of something to look forward to today.